There comes a moment, often without warning, when you realize that something has quietly changed. Perhaps it was standing up from a low chair and feeling the effort. Perhaps it was carrying groceries and noticing the strain. Perhaps it was simply the recognition that movements which once required no thought at all now require a moment of preparation. These small signals are easy to dismiss, easy to attribute to an ordinary Tuesday or an unusually long walk. But they are not random. They are messages from a system that has been slowly, imperceptibly shifting for years. What if the conventional wisdom about why this happens, about what is inevitable and what is not, has been incomplete from the start? What if the body is not simply wearing out like an old machine, but is responding to signals we have forgotten how to send, waiting for materials we have stopped providing, and holding capacity we have been told does not exist? This is not a story about fighting age. It is about understanding what age actually asks of us, and discovering that the answers are far more accessible than we have been led to believe. You are listening to the Longevity Library, where we archive the wisdom of healthy aging. The undisturbed path, strength, time, and the architecture of lasting health. There is a question that arrives quietly, usually sometime after the 50th year. It does not announce itself with urgency. It simply appears one morning, or during an ordinary afternoon, or in the small hours when sleep retreats and thinking begins. The question is this: how much of what I am losing is inevitable, and how much is simply untended? The answer matters more than most people realize. Because the difference between inevitable decline and unnecessary loss is measured not in years added to the end of life, but in the quality of every day that remains. It determines whether the 70s and 80s become a slow retreat from activity or a continuation of engagement with the world. Whether carrying groceries, lifting grandchildren, climbing stairs, or simply rising from a chair without using the arms remains possible. This is not a conversation about living forever. It is about living fully for as long as life lasts. And the foundation of living fully, at any age, is the tissue that most people never think about until it begins to disappear. The substance that holds everything together. Muscle is often misunderstood. It is seen as the concern of athletes and bodybuilders, of young men in gyms and fitness enthusiasts measuring their progress. But this view misses what muscle actually represents in the architecture of human health. Muscle is the body's metabolic reserve. It is the primary site of glucose disposal, meaning that more muscle mass makes blood sugar regulation easier. It is the storage depot for amino acids, the building blocks the body draws upon during illness or injury. It is the engine that drives the basal metabolic rate, meaning that more muscle requires more calories at rest, which helps maintain healthy weight. It is the protector of joints, the stabilizer of movement, the insurance policy against falls that can transform independence into dependence overnight. When muscle is lost, everything becomes harder. Not just movement, but the underlying systems that keep the body functioning properly. Blood sugar becomes more difficult to control. Metabolic rate drops, making weight gain easier and weight loss harder. Recovery from illness slows. The margin for error shrinks. The pattern of muscle loss with age is so consistent that researchers have given it a name: sarcopenia. But the name implies a condition, something that happens to some people, when in truth the loss begins in everyone somewhere around the third decade of life. From age 30 onward, without intervention, muscle mass declines by approximately 3 to 8% per decade. After 60, the rate accelerates. What makes this loss particularly insidious is that it happens invisibly. The body adapts gradually. What was once easy becomes merely possible. What was possible becomes difficult. What was difficult becomes impossible. And because the changes happen slowly, over years and decades, they are accepted as normal aging rather than recognized as a process that can be slowed. halted, or in some cases partially reversed. The efficiency problem that emerges with time. If muscle loss were simply a matter of doing less, the solution would be straightforward. Do more. But the biology of aging is more complex than that. The body does not simply stop building muscle because it is used less. It becomes less efficient at building muscle even when the raw materials are provided. Researchers call this phenomenon anabolic resistance. The word anabolic refers to building processes in the body, the construction of new tissue from raw materials. Resistance means exactly what it suggests. The body becomes resistant to the signals that normally trigger building. In a younger body, eating protein triggers a predictable response. Amino acids enter the bloodstream. Muscles detect their presence, and the cellular machinery for protein synthesis is activated. The signal is clear, and the response is robust. In an older body, the same amount of protein produces a muted response. The signal is sent, but the volume is turned down. The muscles do not receive the message as clearly. The building does not proceed as efficiently. This is not a failure of will or effort. It is a biological change, rooted in the complex chemistry of cells and hormones and inflammation. And it means that the nutritional strategies that served a person well at 30 will not necessarily work at 70. The body needs more, and it needs different, and it needs it at different times. The cruelty of anabolic resistance is that it creates a double burden. The older body requires more protein to achieve the same building response. But the aging digestive system often becomes less efficient at extracting protein from food. Appetite may decline. Chewing may become more difficult. The stomach produces less acid, which impairs protein breakdown. The gut may absorb nutrients less effectively. This is why simply telling older adults to eat more protein rarely produces the desired results. The body is not a simple machine where input equals output. It is a complex system where context matters, where timing matters, where the presence or absence of other nutrients determines whether protein becomes muscle or simply passes through. The timing of fuel and the rhythm of repair. One of the most important discoveries in the study of aging muscle concerns not what is eaten, but when. The body operates on rhythms, cycles of building and breaking that repeat every 24 hours. These rhythms shift with age, and understanding them opens new possibilities for preserving strength. During waking hours, the body is in a state of ongoing activity. Muscles contract, energy is expended, and tissues experience the normal wear and tear of use. During sleep, the body shifts into repair mode. Growth hormone is released, tissues are rebuilt, and the day's damage is addressed. This rhythm matters enormously for muscle. But in aging bodies, the overnight repair process becomes compromised. Without a steady supply of amino acids throughout the night, muscles begin to break down their own tissue to meet the body's minimal protein requirements. This overnight catabolism can undo much of the day's building work. The solution that researchers have identified involves providing a slow-release protein source before sleep. Unlike fast-digesting proteins that enter the bloodstream quickly and are cleared within hours, slow-release proteins form a gel in the stomach that releases amino acids gradually throughout the night. This steady supply prevents the body from turning to its own muscle tissue for fuel and allows the overnight repair processes to proceed with adequate materials. This is not a complicated intervention. It does not require special foods or expensive supplements. It simply requires understanding the body's rhythms and working with them rather than against them. The same principle applies to the post-activity window. After any physical effort, whether formal exercise or simply the normal movements of daily life, muscles become temporarily more receptive to the signals that trigger building. This window of heightened sensitivity lasts approximately 2 hours. Protein consumed during this window is used more efficiently than protein consumed at other times. For a younger body, the difference may be modest. For an aging body facing anabolic resistance, the difference can be critical. Timing becomes not a minor optimization, but a central strategy. The activation threshold and why it matters. Among the 20 amino acids that serve as the building blocks of protein, one plays a unique role in triggering muscle building. Leucine is not simply a component of muscle tissue. It is the signal that tells the body to begin construction. Think of leucine as the key that turns on the machinery. Without sufficient leucine at a meal, even a meal rich in total protein may fail to trigger significant muscle protein synthesis. The building materials are present, but the construction crew has not received the order to begin work. In younger bodies, the threshold for activation is lower. Smaller amounts of leucine can trigger the building response. In aging bodies, the threshold rises. Researchers have identified that approximately 3 grams of leucine per meal appears to be the minimum needed to reliably stimulate muscle protein synthesis in older adults. This explains why simply increasing total protein intake sometimes fails to produce results. A meal may contain 30 grams of protein, but if that protein comes from sources low in leucine, the activation signal may be too weak to overcome anabolic resistance. Different protein sources contain different amounts of leucine. Animal proteins generally contain more than plant proteins, though some plant sources are respectable. Understanding which foods provide concentrated leucine allows for strategic meal planning that hits the activation threshold without requiring enormous portions. This is not about abandoning one food for another. It is about understanding the role each food plays in the complex chemistry of muscle maintenance. Some foods provide bulk protein. Others provide the specific amino acid profile needed for activation. Both are necessary, but they are not interchangeable. The inflammation connection that changes everything. There is another factor that influences how well the body builds and maintains muscle, and it operates largely outside conscious awareness. Inflammation, the body's natural response to injury and threat, becomes problematic when it persists at low levels for years and decades. Acute inflammation is protective. It is the redness and swelling around a cut, the heat in a sprained ankle, the signals that bring immune cells to fight infection and begin repair. This type of inflammation is essential and temporary. Chronic inflammation is something else entirely. It is a low-grade, persistent activation of the immune system that never fully shuts off. It is measured not by visible swelling, but by blood markers like C-reactive protein and inflammatory cytokines that remain slightly elevated year after year. This chronic inflammation acts as a brake on muscle building. The inflammatory signals that are designed to protect the body also interfere with the cellular pathways that trigger protein synthesis. They create an environment where building is suppressed and breakdown is favored. The sources of chronic inflammation are varied. Poor diet plays a role, particularly diets high in processed foods and refined sugars. Excess body fat, especially around the midsection, actively produces inflammatory compounds. Chronic stress, poor sleep, and sedentary behavior all contribute. So does the simple passage of time, as the immune system becomes slightly dysregulated with age. The implication is that muscle preservation cannot be separated from inflammation management. Protein intake matters, but protein consumed in an inflammatory environment is protein wasted. The body cannot build effectively while it is fighting a constant low-grade war. This is why certain foods appear repeatedly in discussions of healthy aging. They provide protein, yes, but they also provide compounds that calm inflammation. Omega-3 fatty acids from fish, polyphenol from colorful plant foods, probiotics from fermented dairy. All of these contribute to an environment where muscle building can proceed efficiently. The cellular power plants and their gradual fading. Deep inside muscle cells, microscopic structures perform work that makes all movement possible. Mitochondria, often described as the power plants of the cell, convert fuel from food into the energy that powers muscle contraction. Without functioning mitochondria, muscles cannot generate force, cannot sustain activity, cannot recover from effort. With age, mitochondria become fewer and less efficient. They accumulate damage from decades of operation. Their internal structures become disorganized. They produce less energy from the same amount of fuel. And when they fail, they are not always replaced efficiently. This mitochondrial decline contributes to muscle loss in multiple ways. Less energy means less capacity for activity, which leads to less use, which accelerates muscle loss. Damaged mitochondria also release signals that can trigger cell death and inflammation. The decline becomes self-reinforcing. But mitochondria are not passive victims of aging. They respond to signals from the body. They can be strengthened and even increased through certain types of activity and certain nutritional inputs. The same pathways that trigger muscle building also stimulate mitochondrial health. This connection means that strategies for preserving muscle are also strategies for preserving cellular energy. The two goals are not separate. They are aspects of the same process, the same effort to maintain the body's capacity for action. Certain compounds appear to be particularly supportive of mitochondrial health. Antioxidants that protect against the oxidative damage mitochondria accumulate during energy production. Specific fatty acids that incorporate into mitochondrial membranes and improve their function. Minerals that serve as cofactors for the enzymes that drive energy production. None of this requires understanding the detailed biochemistry. It simply requires knowing that the foods and habits that support muscle also support the cellular engines that make muscle useful. The observation of long-lived populations. There are places in the world where people consistently live longer, healthier lives than the global average. Researchers have studied these regions extensively, trying to understand what they do differently. The findings are remarkably consistent and remarkably simple. In these blue zones, as they have come to be called, people do not follow complicated diets or exercise regimens. They do not count macronutrients or time their meals precisely. They simply live in ways that, over decades, produce different outcomes. Their diets are predominantly plant-based. Meat appears occasionally, often as a flavoring or a celebration food rather than the center of every meal. Beans and lentils and vegetables form the foundation. Fermented foods appear regularly. Portions are moderate. Their movement is natural and constant. They do not go to gyms. They walk to markets, tend gardens, climb stairs, perform manual tasks as part of ordinary life. The movement is low intensity but high frequency, spread throughout the day rather than concentrated into discrete sessions. Their social connections are strong. They remain embedded in communities, maintain close relationships across generations, and continue to feel useful and needed. Isolation, which research consistently links to poor health outcomes, is rare. Their sense of purpose remains intact. They have reasons to get up in the morning, roles to fill, contributions to make. This sense of meaning appears to have physiological effects, reducing stress hormones and supporting immune function. None of this is mysterious or exotic. It is simply the pattern of human life before industrialization and modern convenience separated movement from daily existence. Before processed foods displaced whole foods. Before social fragmentation replaced community connection. The relevance to muscle preservation is indirect but powerful. The same patterns that support overall longevity also create the conditions in which muscle can be maintained. Adequate protein from varied sources. Regular low-grade movement throughout the day. Low inflammation from a whole foods diet. strong social bonds that reduce chronic stress, purpose that keeps the person engaged with life. These are not interventions to be applied. They are conditions to be created. And they are available to anyone willing to reshape daily existence around principles rather than prescriptions. The first principle: protein as material and signal. If muscle is the architecture of strength, protein is the raw material from which it is built. But protein is more than simply material. It is also signal, information that tells the body when to build and when to rest. Understanding this dual role transforms how protein intake is approached. It is not simply a matter of meeting a daily total, of consuming enough grams to satisfy some abstract requirement. It is about providing the body with what it needs, when it needs it, in forms it can use. The distribution of protein across meals matters more than previously understood. A day's protein consumed primarily at dinner, with minimal protein at breakfast and lunch, produces a different result than the same total amount spread evenly across 3 or 4 meals. The body's capacity to use protein at any one time is limited. Excess at a single meal is not stored for later use. It is simply converted to other uses or excreted. For aging bodies facing anabolic resistance, this distribution becomes critical. Each meal must provide enough leucine to trigger the building response. Each meal must provide enough total protein to sustain that response for several hours. The gaps between meals must not be so long that the body enters a catabolic state. This does not require precise measurement or obsessive tracking. It simply requires awareness that 3 meals with adequate protein produce a different outcome than 1 large meal and 2 small ones. It requires understanding that breakfast, often the meal most likely to be skipped or minimized, matters as much as dinner. The sources of protein matter as well. Different foods provide different amino acid profiles, different accompanying nutrients, different effects on inflammation and insulin sensitivity. A varied diet that includes multiple protein sources is more likely to provide what the body needs than a diet that relies on a single source. But variety should not become complexity. The goal is not to memorize the amino acid profile of every food. It is to understand that eggs and yogurt and fish and lentils and seeds all contribute something valuable, and that relying on any one exclusively means missing what the others provide. The second principle: fat as protector and facilitator. Dietary fat has endured a complicated reputation over the decades. It has been blamed for heart disease, for weight gain, for a host of modern ailments. The reality is more nuanced and more interesting. Fats are essential components of every cell membrane in the body. The flexibility and fluidity of these membranes, which determines how well cells can receive signals and transport nutrients, depends on the types of fats they contain. Membranes rich in saturated fats behave differently than membranes rich in unsaturated fats. For muscle cells, this matters enormously. The signals that trigger protein synthesis must cross the cell membrane to reach the interior machinery. If the membrane is too rigid, the signal is weakened. If it is appropriately fluid, the signal passes through clearly. Omega-3 fatty acids, found abundantly in fatty fish and certain seeds, incorporate directly into muscle cell membranes and increase their fluidity. This is not a vague, theoretical benefit. It is a measurable change that improves the cell's responsiveness to growth signals. The same omega-3s also reduce inflammation through multiple pathways. They are converted into compounds that actively resolve inflammation rather than simply suppressing it. They reduce the production of inflammatory signaling molecules. They shift the immune system away from chronic activation. This dual action, improving signal reception while reducing inflammatory interference, makes omega-3s uniquely valuable for aging muscles. They do not simply provide building materials. They improve the conditions under which building can occur. The challenge is that the modern diet is often severely imbalanced in its fat composition. Omega-6 fats, which are pro-inflammatory in excess, dominate processed foods and conventional animal products. The ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 in the typical Western diet can exceed 20-1, when historical diets likely provided something closer to 2 or 3-1. Correcting this imbalance does not require eliminating omega-6 fats. It requires increasing omega-3 intake to restore a healthier ratio. Fatty fish several times weekly. Daily consumption of flax or chia or hemp seeds. Possibly supplementation with fish oil or algal oil for those who cannot consume enough from food. The fat conversation extends beyond omega-3s. The fats in dairy, particularly fermented dairy like yogurt, contain compounds that appear to support muscle preservation. The fats in olive oil, a staple of Mediterranean diets, provide antioxidant and anti-inflammatory benefits. Even saturated fats from whole food sources play roles in hormone production and cell structure. The lesson is not to fear fat, but to choose it wisely. To prioritize fats from whole foods over fats from processed foods. To ensure adequate intake of the specific fats that support muscle and brain and heart health. To recognize that fat is not a single substance, but a category containing many different compounds with many different effects. The third principle, carbohydrate as fuel and signal. Carbohydrates have also endured reputation fluctuations, perhaps even more dramatic than fats. They have been praised as essential fuel and condemned as unnecessary indulgence. The reality, as with most things, lies between extremes. Muscles run on glucose. During activity, they draw glucose from the bloodstream and from internal stores. Without adequate carbohydrate, the body must manufacture glucose from other sources, a process that is metabolically expensive and that draws resources away from other functions. But carbohydrates do more than provide fuel. They also signal information to the body about energy availability. When carbohydrate intake is very low, the body shifts into a different metabolic state, one that prioritizes fat burning and conserves glucose for essential functions. This state, ketosis, has therapeutic applications but is not necessarily optimal for muscle preservation. The more relevant concern for most people is not carbohydrate quantity, but carbohydrate quality. Refined carbohydrates, stripped of their fiber and nutrients, enter the bloodstream quickly and trigger sharp insulin responses. Over time, these repeated spikes can contribute to insulin resistance, where cells become less responsive to insulin signals. Insulin resistance matters for muscle because insulin is an anabolic hormone. It signals cells to take up nutrients, including amino acids. When cells become resistant to insulin, they also become less responsive to the signals that should trigger protein synthesis. The same metabolic dysfunction that impairs blood sugar control also impairs muscle building. This is why the fiber that accompanies carbohydrates in whole foods matters so much. Fiber slows digestion, blunting the insulin response and creating a gradual rise and fall in blood sugar rather than a sharp spike. Fiber also feeds gut bacteria, which produce compounds that reduce inflammation and improve insulin sensitivity. The practical implication is straightforward. Carbohydrates from whole sources, beans and lentils and vegetables and fruits and whole grains, support muscle health. Carbohydrates from refined sources, white flour and sugar and concentrated juices, undermine it. The same calories, the same grams of carbohydrate, produce entirely different effects depending on the form in which they arrive. For older adults, maintaining insulin sensitivity becomes increasingly important. The decades of processing refined carbohydrates take their toll. The pancreas may still produce adequate insulin, but the cells have learned to ignore it. Reversing this requires reducing the load of refined carbohydrates while increasing the foods that support sensitivity. The fourth principle: movement as signal and structure. Nutrition provides the materials. Movement provides the signal that those materials are needed. Without the signal, the materials are diverted elsewhere. The body builds what it is asked to use. What is not used is gradually reclaimed. This principle operates at every level of biology. Bone thickens in response to weight-bearing load. Blood vessels expand in response to increased flow. And muscle grows in response to tension, to the demand that it generate force against resistance. The kind of movement that signals muscle preservation is not necessarily dramatic. It does not require gym memberships or expensive equipment or hours of dedicated time. It requires that muscles be asked to work regularly against resistance that challenges them. This can take many forms: lifting and carrying, climbing stairs, rising from a chair repeatedly, gardening, walking uphill, using resistance bands, performing bodyweight exercises. The common element is that muscles are asked to do more than they do in sedentary moments. The frequency matters as much as the intensity. Brief periods of movement scattered throughout the day may be more effective than a single concentrated session followed by hours of sitting. The signal to build is strongest in the hours after movement. Frequent signals create frequent opportunities for building. This is where modern life has diverged most dramatically from historical patterns. For most of human existence, movement was woven into the fabric of daily life. Acquiring food required physical effort. Transportation required walking. Work required manual labor. Entertainment required active participation. Now movement is optional, something that must be deliberately scheduled and consciously performed. The default state is sitting. The body receives few signals to maintain the tissues it built over decades of necessary activity. The solution is not to reject modern conveniences, but to recognize their cost and compensate for it. To find ways to reintroduce movement into daily routines. To take stairs instead of elevators. To park farther from entrances. To stand while talking on the phone. To walk while thinking through problems. To garden. To dance. To play with grandchildren. To do anything that asks the body to move. The intensity matters less than the consistency. A body that moves regularly, throughout each day, receives a different set of signals than a body that moves briefly and then sits for hours. The cumulative effect of many small signals may be greater than the effect of a single intense signal followed by stillness. The fifth principle: rest as construction time. If movement provides the signal to build, rest provides the time during which building actually occurs. The two are inseparable. Without rest, movement becomes mere expenditure, a withdrawal from the body's accounts without corresponding deposits. Sleep is the most profound form of rest, the time when the body shifts fully into repair mode. Growth hormone is released primarily during deep sleep. Protein synthesis proceeds most efficiently. Damaged cellular components are cleared and replaced. The day's experiences are processed and consolidated. For older adults, sleep often becomes more difficult to obtain and maintain. The deep sleep stages shorten. Nighttime awakenings increase. The restorative power of a night's sleep diminishes even when total time in bed remains adequate. This decline in sleep quality directly affects muscle. Less growth hormone means less stimulation of protein synthesis. More fragmented sleep means less continuous time for repair processes to operate. The body enters a state of chronic mild sleep deprivation that impairs recovery from activity. The factors that improve sleep are well understood but not always easy to implement. Consistent timing. Going to bed and waking at roughly the same hours each day. Darkness in the sleeping environment. avoiding light that suppresses melatonin production. Cool temperatures, which support the natural drop in core body temperature that facilitates sleep onset. Reduced stimulation in the hours before bed, allowing the nervous system to transition from daytime alertness to nighttime rest. Nutrition also plays a role in sleep quality. Certain foods contain compounds that support sleep. Dairy products contain tryptophan, a precursor to melatonin and serotonin. Tart cherries are one of the few food sources of natural melatonin. Complex carbohydrates consumed in the evening may help transport tryptophan to the brain. The relationship between sleep and muscle is bidirectional. Poor sleep impairs muscle recovery, but regular physical activity, particularly activity earlier in the day, improves sleep quality. Movement and rest support each other in a virtuous cycle that, once established, becomes self-reinforcing. Rest also includes the periods between meals, the hours when the digestive system is not actively processing food. This fasting interval allows cellular cleanup processes to operate, clearing damaged components that accumulate during feeding periods. The balance between feeding and fasting, like the balance between activity and rest, matters for long-term health. The sixth principle, community as biological support. The connection between social connection and physical health is one of the most consistently replicated findings in population research. People with strong social ties live longer, healthier lives than those who are isolated. The effect size is comparable to well-established risk factors like smoking and physical inactivity. The mechanisms are multiple. Social connection reduces stress, lowering levels of cortisol and other hormones that, when chronically elevated, impair muscle maintenance. Connection provides practical support, help with tasks that might otherwise go undone. Connection creates accountability, reasons to maintain health for the sake of others. Connection provides meaning, a sense of purpose that motivates self-care. For older adults, the risk of social isolation increases. Retirement removes the daily contact with coworkers. Children move away. Friends and spouses die. Mobility limitations make leaving the house more difficult. The social networks that were maintained for decades begin to shrink. This shrinkage matters for muscle health in ways that are not immediately obvious. The person who eats alone may eat less, or less well, than the person who shares meals. The person who has no one to walk with may walk less. The person who feels unneeded may lose motivation to maintain the strength that allows them to be useful. The solution is not simply to advise people to make more friends. It is to recognize that community must be cultivated intentionally, that relationships require maintenance just as muscles do. It is to understand that the effort to stay connected is not separate from the effort to stay healthy, but is part of the same project. This can take many forms. Regular contact with family, even by phone or video. Participation in group activities, whether exercise classes or book clubs or volunteer organizations. Involvement in religious or community groups that meet regularly. Neighborly connections that create small daily interactions. Even the presence of a pet, which provides companionship and a reason for daily walks. The quality of relationships matters more than the quantity. A few close connections provide more benefit than many superficial ones. Feeling understood and supported matters more than simply being in the presence of others. The seventh principle, purpose as organizing force. Beyond social connection, beyond nutrition and movement and rest, there is something that organizes all the others. Purpose, the sense that one's life has meaning and direction, appears to have physiological effects that support health at every level. People with a strong sense of purpose have lower levels of inflammatory markers. They have better cardiovascular health. They maintain physical function longer. They live longer overall. The effect is not small and not explainable by other factors. The mechanisms are plausible. Purpose motivates behavior, providing reasons to maintain health habits. Purpose reduces stress, offering perspective that buffers against daily frustrations. Purpose engages the brain in ways that may protect against cognitive decline. Purpose keeps people engaged with life, active and interested and involved. For older adults, purpose often becomes more difficult to maintain. The purposes of earlier life, raising children, building careers, achieving goals, may have been fulfilled or become irrelevant. New purposes must be discovered or created. This is not as daunting as it sounds. Purpose need not be grand or world-changing. It can be as simple as being available for grandchildren, tending a garden, maintaining a home, contributing to a community, sharing skills and knowledge with others. Purpose is whatever makes getting out of bed in the morning feel worthwhile. The connection to muscle is indirect but real. Purpose provides the motivation to maintain the strength that allows continued engagement. The person who wants to travel maintains mobility. The person who wants to garden maintains the ability to dig and lift. The person who wants to help with grandchildren maintains the ability to chase and carry. Without purpose, the motivation for maintenance fades. Why work to preserve strength if strength has no use? Why eat well if meals have become merely functional? Why move if there is nowhere to go? Purpose is not an add-on to health practices. It is the foundation that makes all other practices meaningful. It is the reason to do the work. The answer to the question that arises in every moment of difficulty. Why am I doing this? The integration of principles into daily life. These 7 principles. Protein as material and signal. Fat as protector and facilitator. Carbohydrate as fuel and signal. Movement as signal and structure. Rest as construction time. Community as biological support. Purpose as organizing force. Do not operate in isolation. They interact, each influencing the others, creating a system that is greater than the sum of its parts. A person who eats well but does not move will not maintain muscle. A person who moves but does not rest will not recover. A person who rests but lacks community may lose motivation. A person with purpose but inadequate nutrition will lack the raw materials to support their goals. The integration is what matters. Not perfect adherence to any single principle, but attention to all of them. In balance. Over time. Not rigid rules, but flexible awareness. Adjusting as circumstances change and new challenges arise. This is not a program to be followed for a set period and then abandoned. It is a way of living. A set of orientations that can be maintained for decades. The specifics will change as bodies change, as circumstances change, as understanding deepens. But the principles remain. The question that opened this discussion: how much of what we lose is inevitable and how much is simply untended? Now has a clearer answer. Some decline is built into the biology of aging. The gradual accumulation of damage that no intervention can entirely prevent. But much of what is attributed to age is actually the result of disuse, of inadequate signals, of missing materials, of environments that no longer support the maintenance of the tissues we need. The body, given what it requires, will continue to build and maintain itself for as long as possible. It asks for materials, for signals, for rest, for connection, for meaning. It asks to be used, to be challenged, to be cared for. It asks for attention, not obsession, for consistency, not perfection, for respect, not fear. The years after 50 are not simply a long decline toward incapacity. They are an opportunity to understand the body differently, to work with its changing needs rather than against them, to maintain what matters most for as long as life lasts. The strength that allows independence, the mobility that allows engagement, the energy that allows participation in the world. These can be preserved far longer than conventional wisdom suggests. The path is not mysterious. It is laid out in the patterns of long-lived populations, in the findings of decades of research, in the experience of those who have maintained vitality into their 9th and 10th decades. It requires no special knowledge, no expensive interventions, no heroic efforts. It requires only attention and consistency and the willingness to treat the body as something worth maintaining. The choice is made not once but daily, in the meals prepared and the movements performed and the connections maintained. Each day offers another opportunity to provide what the body needs, another chance to send the signals that say this tissue is still needed, still valued, still essential to the life being lived. The architecture of lasting health is built slowly, meal by meal, step by step, day by day. It is never too late to begin, and the benefits of beginning, however late, are available to anyone willing to make the effort. Not immortality, not freedom from all decline, but something perhaps more valuable: the continued ability to live fully, independently, and engage for as long as life lasts. The architecture of lasting health is not built in a day, and it is not built through heroic effort or extreme measures. It is built through the quiet consistency of providing what the body needs, when it needs it, in the forms it can actually use. The single most important truth to carry forward is this: the body, given what it requires, will continue to build and maintain itself for as long as possible. It asks for materials, for movement, for rest, for connection, for meaning, and it is never too late to begin providing them. If this conversation stirred something in you, if it raised questions or brought clarity or simply offered a different way of seeing, we would be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you would like to continue exploring the wisdom of healthy aging, we invite you to explore other films in this library and to subscribe so that new wisdom finds its way to you. This is the Longevity Library. Listen, learn, and live longer.